was a usual occurrence for someone to tell me how special I was. And at first, I thought it meant that one day I ultimately would save the world. But later, I learned that it meant that somehow I lived in my own one. And carrying your own world around everywhere made it hard for me to fit into most spaces. But one person I always fit in with was Jacob. He lived on the next block over, and even though he might have thought I was special too, he never made me feel like it. However, whenever I would try to hang with Jacob, I always have to try and avoid his landlord, Mr. Howard. He despised the older guys on my block, and since I lived on the block too, he thought I was just like them. But little did he know, the older guys definitely thought I was different. And I don't know if he thought he was protecting Jacob, but it always felt like he was attacking me. I'll always remember the day he took his prejudice assumptions too far. I had recently created this new word game and I wanted to test it out. I asked Moto and Dan first, but I knew Jacob was the only one who would probably play with me. But when I got to Jacob's building, I saw Mr. Howard standing out front. I could see his face filled with suspicion as I started to stroll up, so I figured I'd keep walking, hoping he'd walk back inside. I walked to the end of the block and stood around for a second just admiring the community, but then I turned back to the building to see if the coast was clear, and from what I could tell, it was, so I started to walk back up the block. However, when I got to Jacob's building, Mr. Howard popped out from behind the bushes and yelled out,
"I gotcha!"
I admit, I was both stunned and perplexed. He went on about him watching me case out cars on his block, and it had got me so angry, yet there was a part of me that was sad, because it was one thing to be judged for my differences, but it felt way worse for those differences to be ignored and be accused of being the same, as if I no longer was carrying my own world around, but I was trapped in one. It was then when I opened up my word game and pulled out a word from the deck. But before I passed it to him, Jacob's mom came out the building and walked straight up to Mr. Howard. She must have overheard it all, because she started to give him the business. So much so that the older guys from the block and even Mama walked down to see. And once they realized what it was all about, they all started going in on him. It wasn't long before he needed to case out a car himself and make a quick getaway. But I can't lie, seeing that made me feel really special. Jacob moved when we got to high school, and we really didn't keep much contact after that. But ever since that day, Mr. Howard usually avoided me. However, I always seem to think back to that day whenever I found a safe space, which are usually few and far between. But also, it was the day when I found the power in being different. Because as awkward as it was not to fit in, it was way more awkward to get forced into a space I didn't belong. It's never been easy being me. I mean, the journey gets difficult for all of us, because sometimes I still don't fit in particular spaces. But now, I understand that if I don't seem to fit, it might be because I should be connecting another way. Because adding me should never leave things the same, but to help it become something special.